They say there are mistakes that cost reputations, others that cost fortunes, and some that cost one's sanity. For Eve Callahan, this mistake would cost all three at once. When the first harbor bell echoed over the waters of London, she still believed she was fleeing only from a scandal. 2 hours later, hidden among barrels of spices and bales of cotton, she discovered she was also fleeing reason itself. Before we go on, make sure you subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. It's always a pleasure to know how far our stories travel with you. Now hold tight, because Eve's voyage was only just beginning. The smell of nutmeg and cinnamon was so intense, it made her sneeze at intervals that bordered on despair. The ship's hold was dark, stifling, and rocked with a stubbornness that felt almost personal, as if the vessel knew it was harboring a stowaway and wanted to test her resolve. Eve Callahan, wrapped in a dress that had lost all its elegance since her escape, sat on a crate and sighed. Brilliant Eve. Hide in any random ship, and now you find out it's a cargo vessel. Well done. A triumph for feminine intelligence. The sound of footsteps on deck thundered above her. She counted every step, every distant laugh, every creak of ropes. The ship had departed only hours ago, yet the solitude already felt like an eternal confinement. Then, between one creak and another, a cruel realization struck. There wasn't a single woman aboard, no maid, no lady, no one. The thought of spending days, perhaps weeks, surrounded by sailors made her go pale. And where on earth am I supposed to take care of what needs to be taken care of? She muttered, staring at a bucket that Baptiste, the cook, surely used for things she preferred not to imagine. It was living proof that desperation is the best teacher of improvisation. Hunger came next. Shamelessly, she tried to sleep to fool her stomach, but the smell of dried fruit just a few feet away was torture. She grabbed a handful, chewing quietly, and in doing so realized how treacherously vast the sea was when one had nowhere to go. Above her, Captain Trent Warrick walked the deck with the precision of a man who knew every plank of his vessel. Tall, sharp-eyed, hands always clasped behind his back. Nothing escaped him, not a poorly tied knot, not a nail out of place. The day was clear, but his mood was not. And that morning something bothered him in a way nothing had before. A scent. The air, which had always carried salt and rope, now brought something else. Floral, subtle, almost insolent. Baptiste, why does the deck smell like bergamot? He asked, frowning. The Frenchman shrugged. Perhaps, monsieur, you are smelling the new soap for the ropes. Soap doesn't smell like a lady, the captain replied dryly, as if the mere thought insulted logic. He was known among the men for his sharp nose, a gift or a curse depending on the circumstance. He credited that keen sense for his ability to predict storms, but now, what he sensed was something entirely different. A woman's perfume, and on a ship full of men, that could only mean trouble. While the captain sniffed out the mystery, Eve tried to hold back another sneeze. The Spaniard Miguel de Alvarado, an informal sailor and professional provocateur, came trudging along with a rope over his shoulder and a look of pure tragedy. "For all the saints of the sea," he cried, collapsing against the railing. "Capitan, that spice crate nearly broke my back." "Alvarado, if the weight of a crate defeats you, it's a sign the sea is softening you," said the captain, casting him a look of restrained amusement. The Spaniard straightened up, wounded in his pride. "Softening me? Capitan, por favor. You stand before a Spanish specimen of unshakable strength and virility." And with theatrical flair, he puffed out his chest and smoothed back his wind-tossed hair. "If anyone here is in danger, it's the next lady who crosses my path. But you're whining about the weight of a box, man." "A treacherous box," Miguel insisted, stamping his foot. "Who, in Poseidon's name, stuffs half an elephant inside a load of cotton? I swear it groaned when I set it down." The captain laughed, genuinely amused. Below deck, Eve's eyes went wide. She remembered perfectly the moment. That treacherous box had been hoisted aboard, with her inside. She almost laughed. Then she felt offended. "Half an elephant?" she muttered through gritted teeth. "Insolent man. I weigh less than a starved hen, you Iberian peacock." Laughter echoed above. The sound of life filled the deck. Jokes, ropes snapping, the murmur of the sea. Even hidden, Eve began to recognize the voices. The melodramatic Frenchman, the womanizing Spaniard, the stoic first mate. It was an organized chaos, a brotherhood made of laughter and profanity, and above them all the captain's voice, deep, calm, and sharp as a blade. Trent raised an eyebrow, patient. "If you keep complaining about crates, Alvarado, the only lady crossing your path will be made of wood." The sailors burst into laughter. Miguel, however, was not deterred. He stepped closer to the captain, conspiratorial. "Speaking of ladies, Capitan, when do we reach the next port?" Trent gave him a side glance, already guessing the direction of this conversation. Miguel continued, smiling with his trademark mix of charm and insolence. "I heard that in Bridgetown there's a house of amenities, frequented by exquisite senoritas, exuberant, welcoming, generous with lonely sailors." He paused dramatically, gesturing as if painting a masterpiece. "You should come with me this time, Capitan. You need something other than the scent of salt and solitude." The crew roared with laughter. One man even coughed to disguise it. Trent, however, remained composed, though the corner of his mouth betrayed the faintest wry smile. "Tend to the sails, Alvarado, before you find yourself needing a mirror for company." "As you wish, Capitan," Miguel said, bowing with exaggerated flair. "But remember, the sea may be faithful. It doesn't warm the pillow." Trent merely shook his head, a glint of humor flashing in his eyes before turning back to the horizon. The wind had changed, carrying something sweet and faintly unsettling. He inhaled slowly, trying to trace the source of that floral bergamot scent that seemed to mock his impeccable logic. A distinct and delightful aroma. Strange, very strange. He smiled faintly. The kind of reserved smile serious men allow themselves only when caught off guard by a human thought. But within him, the doubt swelled like a silent tide. He knew this ship as well as his own hand. Every rope, every hinge, every scent. And yet, there was something new aboard, something that did not belong to the sea. Dawn fell over the Tempest's grace with the same temperament as its captain, calm on the surface, restless underneath. The wind whispered through the sails like an old secret, and the sea, ever complicit, rocked the sailors in a rhythm of ropes, waves, and superstition. But Captain Trent Warrick did not sleep. Men like him never slept when instinct said something was out of place. In the hold, someone had left a trail of crumbs. In the galley, a loaf of bread had appeared, bitten, and beside the sacks of coffee, a delicate lace handkerchief, abandoned like a challenge. Trent examined the object with a mix of irritation and curiosity. "This, Elias," he said to his first mate, who stood stiffly at his side, clearly preferring a storm over the captain's bad temper, "does not belong to any of my men." Elias cleared his throat. "It could have come mixed in with the fabric." "Cargo, sir. A supplier's mistake, or maybe a curious dock rat. Rats wear lace now?" Trent lifted the handkerchief, letting it sway before the lantern light. "And do they nibble bread in moderation?" Across the deck, Baptiste, the French cook, crossed himself. "I swear I heard footsteps, Monsieur Capitaine. Light steps, delicate, like those of a ballerina or an angel. An angel with an appetite, apparently," Trent replied dryly. That was when Miguel de Alvarado appeared, shirt unbuttoned to his chest, grin flashing even in the dim light. "If there are lace and perfume aboard, gentlemen, then I, Miguel de Alvarado, scourge of the Caribbean's unmarried ladies, shall find her before the Capitan does." Trent sighed. "And what will you do when you find her, Alvarado? Interview the lady or scare her into leaping overboard?" "That depends." Miguel shrugged, pretending seriousness. "If she's beautiful, I might convince her to stay. And if she's fierce, I might just fall in love." The sailors' laughter echoed across the deck, shattering the stillness of the night. Trent, however, did not laugh. His gaze drifted toward the horizon, as the wind carried that same delicate, almost sweet fragrance, floral, impossible to ignore. He inhaled slowly, resting his hands on the railing, letting the scent stir something deep within him. "Strange, very strange. Smells like a woman." Miguel arched an eyebrow, and in a teasing murmur said, "Or, perhaps, Capitan, you're just missing a woman's company. How long has it been since the last port, You must be delirious from abstinence." The comment set off a round of roaring laughter. Trent rolled his eyes but couldn't quite hide a sly, restrained smile. "Back to work, Alvarado. before I make you walk the plank for a saltwater bath, to cool your head and your imagination. As you wish, Capitan, but I warn you, the sea is cold, and the women at the next port are warm." Miguel gave an exaggerated bow and disappeared down the stairs, laughing. Trent shook his head. The men's humor was what kept the ship alive. Still, there was something about that night, something too alive, an instinct that made him watch both deck and hold with doubled caution. Below, in the spice-scented darkness, Eve Callahan woke with her stomach in revolt. Hunger had finally defeated prudence. The ship's rocking made her dizzy, and to make things worse, the maritime aroma was beginning to blend dangerously with the scent of despair. "Brilliant, Eve," she muttered, clutching her stomach. "You hide in a cargo ship surrounded by rats and sailors, and only now realize you might starve to death before dying of shame." Distant male voices made her freeze. Trent lit a lantern and began descending the steps to the hold. The boards creaked in conspiracy. The wood groaned under the sway of the tide. The trembling light revealed faint traces. Small, footprints far too delicate to belong to a sailor. The captain frowned. Well, looks like the rats have new boots," he murmured, stepping between the barrels. Below, Eve held her breath. The sound of his footsteps boomed through the dark like thunder. Her heart pounded in panic. "Don't move, don't breathe. For heaven's sake, Eve, don't sneeze." A single grain of pepper fell from a crate, tickling her nose. She squeezed her face tight. But fate, as usual, had a sense of humor. "Achoo!" The sneeze exploded like cannon fire. The silence that followed was deadly. Then came his voice, deep, calm, authoritative. "Who's there?" Eve shut her eyes. "Congratulations, Callahan." From anonymity straight to execution. She quickly grabbed a linen sheet and threw it over her head, whispering, "Well then, if I'm to be caught, let it be as a respectable ghost." Trent moved closer, the lantern illuminating the trembling, sheet-covered figure. He stopped. The wild corner of his mouth twitched upward. "By all southern winds, what in blazes is this? A warehouse specter?" Eve cleared her throat, trying to lower her voice. "Repent, sailor, or the spirit of the spices shall curse you." He arched a brow, amused. A talking ghost, and with a sense of humor, fascinating. Before she could back away, he pulled the fabric with a firm motion. The light revealed a face, young, stubborn, dusted with flour, and yet absurdly beautiful. For a moment, neither moved. The lantern flickered between them like an undecided heart. "Good heavens," he muttered, low and half in awe. "A ghost in skirts." Eve tried to look defiant. Not an easy feat when covered in dust and with her hair in disarray. "Touch me and you'll see that ghosts know how to defend themselves." Trent tilted his head, intrigued. "Bold," he murmured, more to himself than to her, and clearly unaware of where she is. "I know exactly where I am," she retorted, arms crossed. "In the hold of a ship that reeks of fish and arrogance." His laugh came low, like thunder kept on a leash. "Arrogance, is it? Well, if you're going to insult me, at least tell me your ghost's name. That's none of your concern, Captain." "On the contrary, Miss Nobody with a sheet, everything aboard is my concern," he said, taking a step closer. "Every rope, every man, every intruder who decides to appear at 4 in the morning pretending to be dead." She swallowed hard, but held his gaze. "You could simply pretend you didn't see me, and leave a stranger wandering my ship?" He smirked faintly. "Not even if she were my guardian angel." His eyes drifted down to the sheet she still clutched to her body. "Since you insist on playing a specter, I think I'll call you Lady Ghost." Eve's eyes widened, indignant. "Lady Ghost? That's ridiculous." "It's the kindest thing I can come up with at this hour," he said calmly, twirling the lantern between his fingers. "When the sun rises, we'll see if you're still so spirited." She stepped closer, chin raised, voice steady. "Don't tell anyone, please. I promise I'll disembark at the next port. You'll never see me again." Trent studied her for a long moment. Serious face, closed expression, but a glint of amusement behind the eyes. "That will depend on how well you behave, Lady Ghost." She huffed in frustration. "You enjoy being bossy, don't you? And you enjoy disobeying." He, countered, leaning slightly closer, his low tone blending with the distant crack of ropes. "But the difference is, on this ship, I'm the one who commands." For a moment, the air between them seemed to vibrate, not with threat, but with sheer, contained tension. Eve stepped forward, chin lifted like a tiny flag of defiance. "Don't tell anyone. Please." He studied her in silence, face still, but his eyes revealing a conflict he refused to admit. "I can't hide you, miss," he said, quietly, his voice scraping against the hush. "Sooner or later my men will find you, and a ship full of sailors, men starved for land and company, is no place for an unguarded lady, no matter how bold she may be." She narrowed her eyes, defiant. "You're mistaken if you think that frightens me. I don't need your pity." His laugh came out rough, muffled, dangerous. "Pity." He took a step forward, the lantern throwing sharp shadows across his face. "This isn't pity. It's prudence. I have no idea who you are, but if any of my men were to find you here, there wouldn't be a single gentleman alive able to save your virtue." Eve's eyes widened. She glared at him, chest rising with an indignant breath. "Then protect me, O honorable captain, instead of threatening me." His gaze dropped to her lips. A muscle in his jaw twitched. "Are you asking for protection, or testing how far I can resist your insolence?" he asked, his voice lower than reason should allow. She blushed, but didn't yield. "Maybe I'm testing how much you fear a woman." For a heartbeat, the silence between them seemed to boil. The captain drew a deep breath, as if swallowing something more dangerous than desire itself. Then, slowly, he leaned in until the lantern's light trembled between them. "Listen carefully, Lady Ghost." His tone was rough now, masculine, commanding. "At dawn, you'll come up to the deck with me. Pretending you don't exist will only draw worse eyes. Under my authority, no one will dare touch you, but disobey even one order, and the sea will be kinder than I." Eve clenched her fist, pride flashing in her eyes. "You speak as if I were some fragile creature." He smiled slightly. "Slow, dangerous. You speak as if you don't know how fragile you are," he replied, stepping back. "Small, stubborn, and with a rare talent for provoking men you should fear. And you have a talent for being insufferably irritating. It's part of the job, Lady Ghost." He turned, climbing the steps with steady strides. "At dawn, bring your courage. You'll need it." The sound of his boots faded into the boards above. The hold sank back into silence and the scent of spices. Eve, still trembling, muttered through clenched teeth, "Lady Ghost. Well then, may he sink with his own humor." But as moonlight slipped through the hatch and she curled up again among the fabrics, one stubborn thought followed her into sleep. If that man is the devil, at least he's a devil with beautiful eyes. The sun had not yet broken the horizon when the Tempest's grace awoke to an unusual commotion. Captain Trent Warrick strode up to the deck, lantern in one hand and over his shoulder. With all the calm of a man carrying a sack of flour, hung Eve Callahan, squirming and cursing in every known language and a few of her own invention. "Put me down, you uniformed barbarian," she shouted, thrashing uselessly. "This is an outrage. If you keep kicking, Lady Ghost, you'll end up in the sea, and I swear I won't dive in after you," he replied, not even breaking stride. The crew began to gather, wide-eyed. Baptiste, the French cook, dropped a ladle. Elias, the first mate, blinked in disbelief, and Miguel de Alvarado, the Spaniard, smiled like a man who had just witnessed a miracle. "Madre de Dios!" Miguel exclaimed, clapping his hands. "So it's true. A miracle indeed. The captain's lady perfume wasn't a hallucination." "Close your mouths, all of you," Trent said coolly, setting Eve down with firm hands. "She's no miracle. She's a problem." Eve spun around, hair disheveled, the sheet still hanging loosely around her arms. "Problem? Me?" She pointed at him, eyes blazing. "You drag me out of the hold, carry me like cargo, and now insult me in front of your men?" Miguel let out a low whistle. "With a kidnapping that elegant, I wouldn't mind being the victim myself." Laughter rippled through the deck until Trent turned his head slowly toward Miguel. The look he gave could have made the sea itself retreat. "Alvarado, one more word, and I'll have you polish every nail on this ship's hull. With your tongue." The laughter died instantly. Eve folded her arms, defiant, holding the captain's gaze. "If you think your commanding tone is going to intimidate me, you're mistaken." Trent took a step closer. His shadow fell over her completely. "Mistaken? No, merely curious." His voice was low, steady, provocative. "Who are you exactly?" She stayed silent, lips pressed tight. He tilted his head slightly, studying her. No sailor alive could hide something on my ship without being found. So tell me, what was your plan here? His eyes dropped briefly to the sheet wrapped around her. Were you planning to cross the ocean disguised as linen and living off stolen bread? She drew a breath, color rising in her cheeks. I had a plan. A plan. He repeated dryly. Excellent. A plan that ends in someone else's hold, surrounded by men who haven't seen a woman in months. The murmurs among the crew stopped dead. No one dared even blink. Eve bit her lip, but kept her chin high. Even so, Captain, I'm still alive. That makes me more capable than half your men. Trent raised a brow, a slow, dangerous smile curling his mouth. Insolent and proud, he muttered, and far too lucky to still be breathing. She stepped forward boldly. Due to luck or courage? Courage would be answering the questions I asked. His tone dropped lower, each word drawn out with controlled irony. But I suppose you'd rather play the silent heroine than admit what you really are. A stowaway with more audacity than sense. Her eyes flashed, but her body faltered just slightly. Enough for him to notice. A glint of amusement crossed his face. So you do know how to retreat, he said, almost whispering. I was beginning to think you were made of iron. She shot back between her teeth. Iron, Captain, at least knows when to bend. You apparently don't have that skill. For a moment, the air between them hummed. Tension, challenge, curiosity. Eve's gaze stayed steady, fearless, though her heart pounded like a war drum. He studied her as a man measuring distance before a jump, aware that one wrong move could set the whole deck ablaze. So tell me, Trent murmured, voice deep and low, what exactly are you running from? That's none of your concern, Captain, she snapped, chin lifted. You're far too curious for a man who already has an entire ship to command. A ripple of amusement ran through the crew. Trent stepped forward, and the wind tugged at the sheet draped over her. Everything aboard my ship is my concern, he countered, his tone sharp, including a sharp-tongued stowaway. Oh, don't exaggerate, she gave a mocking smile. I'm merely a poor, defenseless lady in distress, who happened to board the wrong ship. He laughed softly, a rough, dangerous sound that bordered on pleasure. Defenseless? I see nothing defenseless in someone who hides among barrels and lies with such conviction. Do you fear strong-willed women, then? She challenged, eyes glinting. I fear storms, miss, he said, stepping even closer, and I tend to recognize one when it's about to break. She held his gaze. The air grew heavier between them, almost tangible. Then rest. Easy, Captain, she murmured with a sly, venomous smile. I'm no storm, I'm only the wind, and I blow hardest when someone tries to cage me. His eyebrow lifted slightly, and a low, near laugh escaped him. And do you think I'm not already considering that, Lady Ghost? He asked in a husky tone, so thick with suggestion that Miguel, somewhere behind them, cleared his throat in envy. Eve shot him a deadly glare, but Trent inhaled deeply, gathering back the control he'd nearly lost. Miguel, of course, couldn't resist. Capitan, if she wishes to stay, I swear I'll give up my hammock. I'm not the jealous type, Eve scoffed. You'd give it up for any breathing creature in a skirt, wouldn't you? Miguel clutched his chest dramatically. Ah, Capitan, she already knows my heart. The crew burst into laughter again, until Trent's voice, deep and sharp as a whip, cut through it. Silence! The roar was short, cold, absolute. The deck froze. Even the wind seemed to shrink away. He turned back to Eve, his gaze colder, jaw set. Listen carefully, miss. Here, every man obeys the hierarchy. That's what keeps this ship afloat. You, however, seem to believe rules are merely suggestions. He paused, his voice dropping lower. To me, that's provocation. Perhaps you're just not used to women who answer back. No. He gave a faint, crooked smile, leaning just close enough that only she could hear. I'm not used to women who make me lose my patience or my sanity. Eve blanched for a second, her heart tripping, but she hid it quickly, then regained both, she said crisply, stepping back. Inside, Trent drew a slow breath, swallowing fire, small, stubborn, and with the sharpest tongue ever to cross my deck. But above all, beautiful. And that, amid a crew starved after months at sea, was a curse. He noticed how his men's gazes lingered on her, curious, fascinated, some openly entranced. Heat pounded at his temples. A quiet fury rose in his throat. None of them should be looking at her like that. The sight of those eyes on her, the sheet slipping slightly from her shoulder, her pale skin in the sunlight, it all made him curse inwardly. Damn it. A pack of starving dogs. And I'm about to lose my mind with them. Elias, see that everyone gets back to work, he ordered, voice icy and precise. The show's over. The first mate obeyed instantly. The sailors scattered, muttering under their breath. Miguel, of course, couldn't resist one last jab. Ah, if only the Capitan hadn't found the beautiful lady first. Trent's look silenced him on the spot. A single glance of warning, of claim. A silent message everyone understood. That woman was under the captain's command. He turned back to Eve, gaze tense, voice low. Are you done insulting me, Lady Ghost? Just getting started. She shot back, chin high. He nodded once, like a man accepting a challenge. Good, he murmured. Then you can continue, while you think about your punishment. What? Before she could react, he caught her by the waist and hoisted her over his shoulder in one swift, sure motion, light as a feather. Captain Warrick, she cried, pounding his back with her fists. This is disgraceful. You're right, he said calmly, voice steady, commanding, but it's efficient. The entire deck gaped. Miguel lifted his hat theatrically. Adios, mi amor. If he tires you out, I'll be… waiting to comfort you? Baptiste sighed. Tragic. Mon Dieu. A flower in the hands of a gardener with no delicacy. Laughter rang again, but the captain never turned his head once. He climbed the stairs with firm steps, her light weight over his shoulder, her sweet scent chasing him through the air. When he pushed open the cabin door and stepped inside, the laughter outside fell silent. He set her down, his expression still dark, and locked the door with a heavy click. Eve turned, breathless. You're going to lock me up now? Yes, until the sun's high enough for you to remember this ship is not a ballroom. She crossed her arms, chin lifted. You're a tyrant. He stepped closer slowly, eyes fixed on her, voice rough and low. And your temptation on 2 feet, he murmured, more to himself than to her before turning away, before he said something he'd regret. Stay quiet, and pray the sea stays calm. When the door shut, she heard the lock turn from the outside. She huffed, exasperated, looking around the immaculate cabin, his space, his scent, his authority in every line and detail. Lady Ghost, she muttered, half angry, half intrigued. May he drown in his own humor. But as she sat in the armchair and gazed at the rolling sea through the window, the confession slipped out. Soft, defiant, almost a smile. If that man is the devil, he's still the most dangerously beautiful devil ever to have a heart. The third day aboard the IC. Tempest's grace dawned with the familiar sound of wood and wind, noises that somehow had already begun to weave themselves into Eve Callahan's routine. When the latch of the door turned, she was sitting at the small table in the captain's cabin, finishing the last bite of stew he had ordered to be brought to her. The bowl was practically spotless, which made him raise one eyebrow, satisfied. I see you survived confinement, he said, leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed, the steel in his gaze softened by a faint trace of humor. You've eaten, rested, and you're still in one piece. Excellent. Now, only the most important part remains. Eve looked up, suspicious. What exactly? Trent didn't answer right away. Instead, he stayed in the doorway, watching her with a calm that wasn't quite calm, the kind of silence that usually came before provocation. She sat there, the plate still warm before her, her hair loose, tumbling in waves over her shoulders, a small drop of stew staining the corner of her lips. For a moment, he forgot his words, absorbing the scene, the chaotic, intoxicating contrast of a lady's presence inside his orderly, masculine world. Good God, he thought, how can a woman look so out of place and yet seem so perfectly right here? He stepped forward, the wooden floor creaking under his boots. His gaze traveled slowly, from her crooked collar down to the small hands clutching the fork, and when he spoke, his voice came rough, low, with that dangerous slowness that makes the skin react before the mind. To decide whether you'll go on being a burden aboard or pay your passage. She frowned, fork suspended mid-air, her confusion quickly replaced by an almost offended indignation. Pay? She repeated, her voice rising half a tone. I have no intention of being touched, Captain, if that's what you… What followed was silence. Dense, tense, almost audible. Trent didn't move, his gaze fixed on her, not with lust but with a kind of curiosity that bordered on fascination. Her boldness, the fire in her tone, the way she stood her ground without thinking of consequences, every part of him responded to that. Then the corner of his lips curved into a slow, lazy smile laced with irony. He took another step forward, the lamplight catching on the hard line of his jaw, the insolent gleam in his eyes. "Touch you?" he asked, his voice so low it seemed to vibrate more than sound. "Heavens, miss, you truly underestimate me." She shot to her feet, her face flushed. "Let it be perfectly clear," she said, her voice trembling not with fear but fury, "that I would never engage in that kind of arrangement." His smile deepened, and for an instant it seemed her very existence amused him more than the sea itself. "Well, well," he murmured, stepping closer. The air between them seemed to tighten. "And who said I was interested in arrangements, Lady Ghost?" She blinked, uncertain. The name sounded almost intimate, dangerous on his lips. Trent leaned in slightly, his gaze dropping to her mouth before returning to her defiant eyes. "The payment I require is much simpler," he continued, pausing for effect. "It involves no sheets, only soap." Eve blinked, bewildered. "Soap?" He extended his arm. In his hand was a metal bucket and a long bristled brush. "The deck," he explained, amused. "I like my ship shining, and since you've decided to travel free of charge, you can start paying with what you have in abundance. Energy and stubbornness." She stared at him, incredulous. "You're ordering me to scrub the floor?" "I'm giving you the privilege of reflecting on your choices while you do it," he replied calmly. "Consider it part of your maritime education." Eve crossed her arms, huffing. "I was not born to scrub planks, Captain." He tilted his head, studying her with the half-smile of a tamed wolf. "No, you weren't," he admitted. "But perhaps the sea will teach you what London forgot." Before she could answer, he turned to leave, glancing over his shoulder one last time. "Start with the main deck, and don't forget the soap. It smells of bergamot. It might suit your perfume." Eve watched him go, her heart pounding between anger and a strange heat she couldn't explain or forgive. For a second she considered throwing the plate at the door. Then she sighed, grabbed the bucket and muttered, "Bergamot? Arrogant, presumptuous, and obsessed with cleanliness. May the sea swallow him whole." She marched out, her loose blonde hair swaying like a battle flag. Trent watched her slender figure disappear up the steps, the faint scent of bergamot lingering in the air like a provocation. The following days became a curious dance between routine and provocation. Eve, brush in hand, scrubbed the deck under amused stares, and though she pretended disdain, her gaze sometimes drifted toward the horizon. Between one bucket and another, she prayed in silence. "May he never discover where I am. May my half-brother never find me." But fate rarely shows mercy to those who run. Baptiste, the cook, delighted by the novelty of having a real lady aboard, insisted on preparing refined dishes for her. "Mademoiselle, every woman deserves a dinner fit for a ball, even if the ballroom is the ocean." She laughed, with little Thomas by her side, helping carry plates and wash pots. The orphaned, curious boy had become her little ally, showing her the ship's secret corners and whispering stories about the captain. "He's got the sharpest nose on the whole sea. Sniffs out lies, Lady Ghost." At night, though, the ship changed its mood. The sky turned leaden, and the wind whispered warnings only seasoned sailors could understand. By the fourth dawn, the storm had caught them. The sea roared like a beast. Lightning tore the horizon apart. Trent, at the helm, shouted orders over the howl of the wind. Elias gripped the wheel. Miguel tied ropes, and young Tommy, brave but small, struggled against the force of the gale. Seeing the boy fight the mast, Eve ignored both reason and instinct. "Hold on, Tommy," she cried, rushing toward him. Her skirts lashed against her legs, rain soaked her face. A loose rope cracked through the air, and before she could shield herself, the captain yanked her roughly against him. Her body collided with his. Strong, warm, solid as the ship itself. For a moment everything went silent. Only their ragged breaths mingled with the crash of thunder. "Are you completely mad?" he roared, his face too close, rain streaming down his hair. "You could have been killed." "The boy needed help," she shot back, breathless, trying to pull away. He gripped her shoulders, firm, eyes blazing with both anger and something far more dangerous. "And I don't need a second child to rescue." The wind surged. Again, the lantern swinging wildly, its light brushing across her features. Defiant eyes, parted lips, trembling breath. For a second his fury faltered, replaced by something heavier, something that made him swallow hard. "The deck in a storm is no place for a lady. Go back to the cabin now." She hesitated, but his tone left no room for argument. When the sea finally calmed and night fell heavy and exhausted over the tempest's grace, he returned to the cabin for a talk. Eve was still drenched, her dress clinging to her skin like a second layer of courage and recklessness. Her hair, wild and heavy, framed her face as the lantern cast gold reflections over the drops sliding down her cheeks. Trent, equally soaked, leaned against the table, his dark uniform plastered to his broad frame, eyes half-narrowed, part anger, part disbelief. "Disobeying orders in the middle of a storm," he began, his voice low, rough, slow, "is the sort of thing that makes a man lose his patience and his sanity." She crossed her arms, trembling but defiant, chin raised as if the cold were beneath her concern. "You should be grateful," she said, insolent. "I saved Tommy and your mast." His gaze lifted slowly to meet hers. A look that weighed, a look that saw. The half-smile that formed on his lips was far too dangerous, a mix of exasperation and something far more intimate. "And you nearly sank my sanity along with it." The laugh that slipped from her was brief, almost sweet, and for a heartbeat it seemed to light the cabin more than the lantern did. Trent looked away, running a hand through his damp hair, trying to reclaim the control this woman seemed able to rip from him with a single breath. "What were you thinking, miss?" he murmured, charging into a squall between lines and masts as if you were immortal. "I was thinking someone needed to protect that boy," she answered, steady, since the captain was very busy being a captain. He straightened slowly, his body casting a shadow over her. "Protecting people is my job," he said, his voice deeper, almost offended. "But there's a difference between courage and madness." Silence pressed in. His eyes traveled over her, intent, searching, as if looking for answers she wasn't ready to give. Who was this unknown woman who defied him so completely? Then softer, his voice dropped like a veiled command. "Tell me your name." Eve swallowed, hesitating a fraction. He didn't move, but the firmness in his gaze made it clear. This wasn't a request. It was a right. "I have a duty to know who has boarded my ship." She drew a breath, keeping her eyes on his. "Eve," she said at last simply. "It's all I can give." Trent held her gaze for long seconds, as if engraving the name, or the taste of it. Eve. It sounded like the beginning of a sin, the first note of a temptation too old to ignore. He nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on her. "Eve?" he repeated, testing the sound. "A short name for a woman who causes such an uproar." She arched a brow, defiant. "Perhaps the problem isn't me, Captain, but your habit of trying to control everything. The sea, people." He stepped closer, near enough that she felt his heat even through the damp. "Control keeps this ship afloat," he said, rough-voiced, "and everyone alive, including you." The air seemed to hum. For a second, neither of them moved. She looked back at him, not with fear, but with something new in her eyes. Recognition. Maybe, she thought, his authoritarian streak was more armor than tyranny. Maybe, beneath that rigid discipline, there was a man who simply didn't know how to love without protecting. Trent drew a long breath, his heart still racing. "Go rest, Eve," he said lower, "and for the love of God, don't challenge death again before breakfast." She dipped a mocking curtsy. "I promise nothing, Captain." He watched her go, the sound of her footsteps blending with the slap of waves. Alone, he leaned back against the table, his hand sliding to the lace handkerchief he kept in his pocket. Her handkerchief, found in the cargo hold, with a faint trace of bergamot, now mixing with her freshest memory. Again that impossible trail, light as wind, stubborn as memory. It wasn't perfume, it was presence, and amid the salt, he could have sworn the whole sea was beginning to smell like her. Eve, the stowaway, the insubordinate, the deliciously perfumed woman he couldn't, no matter how he tried, stop imagining. And as the wind blew calm back over the waters, Captain Trent Warrick knew, with the clarity the sea grants lost men, that the real storm now lived inside him. The sun sank lazily, tinting the deck in shades of copper and gold. The sea breathed in wide waves, and for the first time in days, the ship seemed at peace, as if it had forgotten the wounds of the last storm. Eve leaned against the rail, her gaze lost on the horizon. The wind played with the loose strands of her hair and teased the collar of her dress. Trent, a few steps behind, watched, or tried not to. The sound of her laughter among the crew had become a sweet irritation, a dangerous distraction. Since being forced to pay her passage, Eve had somehow conquered the ship. Miguel, the womanizing Spaniard, was already composing tragic serenades in her honor. Ah, mi fantasma de ojos de luna. Batiste cooked dinners fit for a ballroom just to see her smile, and young Tommy, all knees and innocence, had become her devoted knight, ready to fight even the wind for her. Trent pretended annoyance, but he knew the truth. What truly unsettled him was his own heart, betraying reason. Her presence changed the air. The ship, that old body of wood and iron that obeyed only the captain, now seemed to belong to her. He approached, slow and deliberate. "I see you've adapted a bit." "Too well, Lady Ghost." His voice was low, laced with irony. "It's remarkable what a woman can do when survival demands it, Captain," she replied without turning, eyes still on the sea. "And apparently I've been a good investment. Your men work harder and fight less." He raised a brow. "And mock more." "Oh, but laughter, Captain." She turned slightly, smiling that half-smile that always disarmed him. "Laughter is the salt that keeps the soul from rotting." The wind picked up, and the light fabric of her dress moved like a veil. That was when Trent saw, for the briefest second, a flash of gold slipping from her neckline, a medallion, glinting in the sunset. He froze. The shape was unmistakable. The embossed crest, a winged falcon over a split star. His blood ran cold. "Where did you get that?" he asked, quicker than he meant to. Eve, startled, looked down and instinctively covered the medallion with her hand. "This?" she said, too lightly to be convincing. "Just a family keepsake." "Whose family?" His tone hardened. She took a step back, eyes sharp. "That's none of your concern, Captain. Everything that comes aboard my ship is my concern," he replied, voice low but brimming with authority. "And that symbol isn't just a keepsake, I know it." Her heart seemed to stop for an instant. The wind, ever the accomplice, lifted the medallion again. He caught it before it could fall back against her chest. Their fingers brushed, and for a heartbeat, both felt the dangerous spark of contact. Trent turned the piece over in his hand, studying the carving. His face hardened. "This crest belongs to House Ashworth," he said at last, his voice almost disbelieving. "A family that should have sunk in its own shame after the scandals of smuggling and treason." Eve held her chin high, but color drained from her face. "You speak as if you knew that family well." He met her gaze, and in it, he saw something that made him hesitate. The same look he'd seen in soldiers who had lost everything, a mix of courage and grief. "I knew enough not to trust anyone wearing their emblem," he returned, tense. She stepped closer. "Then perhaps you should start questioning your certainties, Captain," she whispered. "Not everyone who bears a symbol does so out of pride. Some carry it to survive." The silence that followed was cutting. Inside, he wrestled with himself. That medallion was the echo of a shipwreck that had haunted him for years, and now, hanging from the neck of a woman who met his stare without fear, it had become an enigma he couldn't ignore. She held out her hand. "Give it back." He hesitated. Their fingers brushed again, the cold metal trapped between warm palms. "One day you'll tell me why you lie so well," he murmured. "And you, Captain, why do you care so much?" She shot back, stepping away. He almost smiled. "Because I've learned that a woman's secrets tend to sink faster than any ship." She glared at him and he turned away, composed on the surface but burning inside with anger, fascination, and guilt. As she walked off, the medallion caught the light again against her skin, and he stood alone on the deck, whispering a name he never thought he'd speak again. Ashworth. The sea roared in the distance, as if it held the answer, and in the air, her perfume mingled with salt and guilt, marking the beginning of something neither of them would be able to stop. The port rose on the horizon like an old scar, half a dozen faded wooden buildings, the stench of sour rum, and men who stared too long at anything that breathed. It was the kind of place where even the seagulls seemed to mistrust their own flight. The ship slowed, anchoring beneath the heavy afternoon wind. The crew scattered to their familiar duties, repairing ropes, loading water barrels, bargaining for provisions. And above them all, Captain Warrick stood, firm at the helm, calloused hands gripping the dark metal. His eyes narrowed toward the horizon. Eve watched him from afar, leaning against the rail. The wind toyed with her unruly hair, and her gaze followed his movements with a focus she didn't care to admit. There was something hypnotic about that man, the steadiness of his shoulders, the way the sunlight carved lines of gold along his profile, the air of absolute command. He was strength and solitude made flesh. For an instant, she wondered what it would feel like to be inside those arms. Just one instant. She imagined the heat, the weight, the low voice whispering her name against her neck. The image came so vividly that she caught her breath, startled by her own thought. Heavens, Eve, you've lost your mind, she muttered under her breath, trying to shake off the warmth rising through her body. Admiring the view, or the Capitan? The lazy, amused voice came from behind her. Eve spun around. Miguel de Alvarado, the insolent Spaniard, leaned against the mast with a smile that would have been even more shameless if the sun didn't stop it halfway. You see too much, Alvarado. No. I see only what's necessary to live well, he replied, placing a hand over his chest as if swearing eternal love. And what's necessary in this case is to watch a lady looking at our Capitan as if deciding whether to drown him or kiss him. Eve gasped, indignant. You're delirious, sailor. It's the heat. Then let it be the heat, mi fantasma, he laughed. But if I were the wind, I too would try to touch what the Capitan pretends he doesn't desire. She turned away with a huff, but the betraying blush gave her away. The captain, up ahead, seemed unaware, though in truth he had heard every word. Their eyes met for a brief instant, just one, but it was enough for the air between them to grow thick, even with the sea stretching wide between them. Eve broke the gaze, pretending to focus on the ropes. Trent's lips curved into that rare smile the crew both feared and admired. It wasn't amusement, it was warning. A few hours later, when the ship docked, the air shifted. The port of ghosts, as the sailors called it, seemed to breathe secrets and bad luck. Eve noticed the tension in the captain's shoulders as he barked short orders, his voice rougher than the wind. But what truly caught her attention was the moment he approached her, eyes locked on hers. Don't even think about stepping off this ship, he said flatly. Are you giving me orders now? I'm preventing you from being sold before sunset. He shot back, cold as steel. You don't command me, Captain. And besides, I came aboard for passage to the next port. This looks like one to me. No, miss, he growled, his voice deepening with irritation. This isn't a port. It's a small corner of hell. His eyes traced her face, her shining hair, her beauty that seemed to mock him with every breath. Men here pay dearly for anything pretty and unprotected. You have no idea the danger you'd face if you set foot ashore. And you, sir? She challenged, chin raised. Would you buy if the price were fair? His gaze hardened, and for a moment she thought he might answer. But what came instead was worse. A silence so sharp it cut through the flapping of the sails. Then, a dangerous half-smile, the kind that always came before a storm. I don't buy what already belongs to me, miss. She gasped, shocked and furious. Damn him, he knew exactly how to disarm her, and she hated him for it. She wanted to reply, but the captain had already turned away, eyes on the horizon, striding off to shout orders at the crew preparing to unload supplies, leaving Thomas behind to watch over her. The ship anchored slowly in the port, and the heavy air carried the scent of cheap tobacco, rotten fish, and promises no one kept. Trent went ashore to handle supplies, water barrels, sacks of flour, new sails. Eve watched from a distance, her heart beating as if something about to break was drawing near. On the small pier, the captain walked among drunken sailors and hard-eyed merchants. His sensitive nose made him curse at every turn. For God's sake, someone wash this damn place, he muttered, sidestepping a spilled rum barrel and a man who reeked worse than the deck after a week of calm seas. He stopped before a makeshift counter, negotiated the provisions firmly, but something in his body remained alert, that same instinct that warned him of storms before the sky even darkened. About an hour later, as he prepared to return to the ship, he caught whispers near the tavern. Two sailors were exchanging gossip between gulps of rum. "They say there's a high bounty on a woman, a pretty blonde thing, clear eyes, a tongue that could challenge the devil himself, ran away from London." "A fugitive?" The other laughed. "Some jewel thief?" "Worse." The man leaned closer, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial tone. "They say she's the bastard daughter of a dead lord, and her half-brother wants her back. Inheritance trouble, that's what the dockside tongues are saying." Trent froze. The man's cup slipped from his fingers, spilling rum over his boots. He didn't even notice. His mind raced faster than the wind. Eve. Damn it, it can't be coincidence. He tossed a few coins on the counter and strode across the pier as if the wood beneath his feet might catch fire. He climbed the gangplank almost running, chest tight, rage and fear tangling into one burning surge. He cursed under his breath, his voice rough and low, every word hotter than the last. "Damn you, woman, I can't protect you if I don't know who you are." The wind lashed his face, salt clinging to his skin. "Sea witch, you're driving me mad. I want to punish you. No, I want to kiss you." He stopped halfway up the plank, breathing hard. "I want to kiss you until you confess everything, and then punish you for stealing my sanity." That was when he noticed. Silence. Absolute silence. The deck was empty, and little Tommy, the cabin boy, lay unconscious near the ropes, a thin cut across his forehead. Trent dropped to his knees, checking the boy's pulse. Alive. Thank God. But Eve. The captain's heart thundered like a cannon. "Eve, where are you?" He roared into the void, his voice tearing through the stillness, echoing against the motionless sails. He scanned the sea, then the port, running across the deck, blood pounding in his ears, chest burning as if the wind itself were striking him. No sign of her. None, until something gleamed near the mast. A scrap of white lace torn, caught between the planks. Trent crouched slowly, fingers brushing the fabric, still warm from the sun, still carrying the scent that had haunted him since the first day. The air left his lungs. "Damn you," he whispered, closing his hand around the lace. "What have they done to you?" 3 times he cursed himself. For leaving her alone, for believing she was safe under his command, and for feeling more than he ever should for a woman who, by all accounts, was a fugitive. Should have stayed. Should have stayed. He repeated in his mind as fury rose like the tide. His thoughts spun in 1,000 directions. Had she been taken? Fled out of fear? Or betrayed by fate itself? He slipped the piece of lace into his coat pocket and rushed to the boy's side. "Thomas," he called, kneeling beside him. "Wake up, lad. Come on, talk to me." The boy groaned, eyelids fluttering open. Trent gripped his shoulders tightly, desperation roughening his voice. "What happened here? Who came aboard? Where's the lady?" The boy blinked, dazed, trying to recall. But before he could answer, the captain was already on his feet, his gaze sweeping the horizon. There, between the port and the open sea. "Hold on, my lady ghost," he murmured, voice thick with fury and promise. "By all the gods of the sea, I will find you." And as he descended to the docks once more, hunting for clues and men to follow him, the rage in his stride was so fierce that even the wind seemed to part in his wake. The wind howled fiercely over the port as Captain Warrick stormed into the tavern, driven by the urgency of a man whose blood was boiling from within. The white lace was still in his pocket, the last trace of Eve Callahan, his lady ghost. Scraps of conversation, threats, and a few well-placed fists on shady tables. Trent got what he needed. Clues. An old fisherman, his beard damp and his eyes yellowed from rum, told him what he'd seen. "They took a blonde woman, Captain. Fought. Like an angel in despair," the man muttered, spitting on the floor. "Put her aboard the Serpent Queen." The name made the captain pale. The Serpent Queen belonged to Malcolm Vane, a degenerate corsair known for trading in human flesh whenever gold ran thin. Trent's fist clenched, his jaw tight. "Then she's in the hands of a worm," he whispered. "And I was the fool who left her unguarded." Without waiting for help or permission, he ran back to the Tempest's grace. One look from Elias, his first mate, was enough to say it all. "We're going after them," Trent ordered. "Forget the cargo, set the sails. Capitan will lose the contract. I've lost worse," he replied, voice low and resolute. Now move. The brig slipped into the sea under the lash of rain, cutting through the waves like a wounded beast. Thunder roared, the wind tore at the sails, but the captain did not yield. For a moment, he felt the old fear return, the same that had haunted him the high night he lost an innocent man. Not again, he swore. Not this time. Captain, the wind's against us, Elias shouted. Then the wind will learn to obey. The tempest's grace plunged into the storm with the fury of a hunted animal. Lightning carved their path, and the assault began beneath a high, pitiless moon. Iron hooks flew from one deck to the other. Two seasoned crews clashed. Screams, fire, thunder. Trent led his men with the precision of a predator. Every strike, every command, was driven by one single thought: find her. After long, brutal minutes of hand-to-hand combat and a frantic search through the enemy ship, he finally saw her, in the shadows of the Serpent Queen's hold, a fragile figure, bound, her pale face slick with salt and sweat. "Eve!" he roared, tearing through the men in front of him. She heard him, she would always hear him, and for a fleeting instant her eyes gleamed in the darkness, the pure reflection of relief. He cut her ropes and pulled her into his arms. Her body was too light, too cold. She tried to speak, but only a whisper escaped, drifting between delirium and fever. "I just wanted to prove that my father wasn't a traitor." The word struck him like a harpoon to the chest. For a heartbeat, the captain forgot the chaos raging around them. God help me. Fate has a cruel sense of humor. He lifted her into his arms and climbed the stairs with steps that defied pain itself. Rain lashed his face like molten steel. "Hold on, Eve. Hold on, damn it," he murmured, his face pressed to hers. "This time, I came in time." On the deck of the Tempest's Grace, Miguel and Elias hauled them back aboard over the railing. The sound of the sails being hoisted mixed with the shouts of victory. The vile enemy ship, aflame, was swallowed by the sea behind them. Back in his cabin, Trent laid her on the bed, his hands trembling as he brushed the wet strands from her face. Her skin was pale, but alive. "Don't die, my lady Phantasma," he whispered softly, almost a prayer. "Don't make me pay." "Don't die, my lady Ghost," he whispered softly, almost a prayer. "Don't make me pay for two ghosts in one lifetime." She opened her eyes for a brief moment, just long enough to see him there, drenched and exhausted, with the look of a man who had faced hell for her. A faint, childlike smile touched her lips. "You came for me," she murmured, before fainting into his arms. Trent drew a deep breath, his heart both torn and grateful. "I always would," he answered. Though she couldn't hear him, he removed her soaked dress and dressed her in one of his dry shirts, wrapping her gently so she wouldn't worsen. Then he sat beside her, keeping vigil through the night, cooling her fever as she slept. While the rain washed the deck clean and the Tempest's Grace found its course once more, the captain remained by her side, watching the rise and fall of her chest. In the glow of the lamplight, he saw his own reflection, the man he thought he'd buried long. Go and understood the truth at last. Eve was not a mistake. She was the forgiveness he never knew he'd been waiting for. The storm had passed, but the deck still trembled with the echo of the night before. After sleeping the entire day, Eve awoke slowly, beneath the last rays of sunlight, her body sore, her gaze heavy, feeling the calm sway of the ship. She was once again aboard the Tempest's Grace, wrapped in clean sheets and the familiar scent of cedar and salt. His scent. When the door opened, the captain entered in silence. His face was set, his jaw tight, but his eyes, shadowed and unreadable, burned with something she could not yet name. Trent stood by the table for a long moment, saying nothing, only watching. Around her neck rested the medallion. She saw his gaze fixed on it and realized she could no longer hide. "So that was your secret, Eve, about your origin," he said flatly, though the depth of his voice betrayed fatigue. Eve sat up slowly, her heart unsteady. "So now you know that He folded his arms. "I only know that the name Ashworth has ruined more lives than the sea and fury, including mine. But your truth, I want to hear from you, Eve." The silence that followed was almost tangible. She took a deep breath, and for the first time her defenses began to fall. "Lord Henry Ashworth," she said, her eyes glistening. He was my father, not by name, but by blood. I am the daughter of the housekeeper he loved in secret. For many years, Trent didn't move. His fists tightened slowly. I knew your father, he said at last, voice low. He died aboard a ship under my command, in the wreck that marked me for life. The Navy branded him a traitor. They claimed he tried to sell government secrets. And though I always knew he was innocent, I couldn't save him that night. Eve lifted her gaze, pain and tenderness in equal measure. He knew they would blame him. He left everything recorded. Notes, letters, ledgers. He discovered that Cedric, my half-brother, his legitimate son, was profiting from a diplomatic smuggling network. When he threatened to expose it, he was silenced. The explosion that sank the ship, it wasn't an accident. Trent took a step back, his expression hardening. God in heaven, he muttered. Then it was him. She nodded. Cedric never feared raising his hand against his own father, and he's been hunting me ever since he learned I hold the evidence against him, entrusted to me by my mother before she too died. After my father was gone, the inheritance he's trying to take from me is only part of it. The real treasure is the truth that would destroy him. The captain turned toward the sea, the weight of the past pressing against his shoulders. For years he had carried the guilt of not saving that honorable man in time. Now, that man's daughter was before him, alive, fragile, and somehow under his protection. When I first saw you, Eve continued, her voice thick with emotion, I sensed something in your eyes, the same look my father described in his letters, a young captain who still believes in honor, even when the world turns into a field of lies. The words struck Trent like the crash of a wave. Lord Henry had written about him, trusted him. Had she known who he was all along? And now fate had placed him once again before that trust, in the form of a woman who carried both the blood and the courage of the man he couldn't save. He turned toward her, stepping closer. So, all of this, he murmured. The medallion, your escape aboard my ship, your silence, it was part of something far greater than I imagined. That's why you were so guarded? Eve nodded, eyes shimmering. I couldn't trust anyone, Captain. Not until I saw how you protect your men. Not until I realized that maybe my father hadn't been wrong about you. That's why I didn't hesitate to hide aboard your ship. It was reckless, I know. But now I see the hand of fate, or perhaps of my father, wherever he is, guiding me to the right place. Trent drew a deep breath, fighting the knot rising in his throat. And now, he asked, his voice hoarse, what will you do with this truth? She looked at the medallion on the table, then back at him. Live long enough to place it in the right hands, she said firmly, and clear his name, my father, the man I love. For a long moment, neither spoke. He looked, at her, feeling his chest burn. She in turn saw not just the captain before her, but the man whom guilt had tried to destroy, now standing before his chance at redemption. Trent picked up the medallion and returned it to her, his fingers brushing hers in a brief but loaded touch. Then the sea has bound us to a purpose, Eve Callahan Ashworth. She smiled, sad and beautiful. I'd rather remain just Eve. His eyes softened. As you wish, Lady Ghost, he said with a weary, half-smile. But know this, as long as I breathe, no one will touch you. For a moment, silence stretched between them, thick, alive. The ship groaned in the distance, as if it too breathed with them. He stepped closer, only one step, but it was enough to change the air. Her scent of flowers and bergamot mingled with the cedar that clung to him, and the world seemed to narrow to the space between two breaths. Eve looked up slowly. That man, so contained, so hard, and devastatingly handsome, now looked at her as if he stood on the edge of a dangerous choice. The glimmer in his eyes was no longer guilt. It was restrained hunger, and for a moment she forgot fear, forgot the past, forgot even her own name. A blush rose to her porcelain face, and he relished being the cause of her silent surrender. He leaned in, just enough for his warm breath to brush her skin. You've been driving me mad since the first day, he murmured low, and you don't even realize it. She parted her lips, maybe to protest, maybe to answer, maybe to give in to the desire burning between them. But there was no time. The door burst open. Mon capitaine, Baptiste exclaimed triumphantly, balancing a tray. The soup for our Lady Ghost. The lady needs sustenance. Right behind him, Miguel entered with a wide grin. And perhaps company, eh? Ah, señorita, how radiant you look. May I sing? A song about your beauty, the sea, and forbidden love. Trent closed his eyes, drawing a deep breath so as not to strangle anyone. Very well. You've brought the soup, you've seen the lady, now out. But Capitan, out. His deep voice sliced the air like steel. The lady needs rest, and you two are far too loud. Batiste and Miguel exchanged glances, muttered a resigned oui, and retreated, whispering about a beauty even the sea would envy, clearly delighted for having ruined their captain's romantic moment with his fiery lady. Trent waited for silence to return. He looked at Eve. She was flushed, caught between laughter and embarrassment. He sighed, stepping back with effort. Rest. Tomorrow will be a long day. When he left the cabin, the cold air of the deck hit him like a blow. The sea shimmered under the moonlight. He climbed to the helm, his body tense. Elias, the first mate, approached. Where to, Captain? Trent gazed toward the horizon. North. We've a delayed contract, and a lady who must reach justice. He gave one more order, sharp and precise. Clean the deck, all of it. The hold too, and trim the sails. I don't want a shadow of negligence on this ship. The men obeyed, silent. As the Tempest's grace cut back into the current, Trent kept his hands firm on the wheel, but his thoughts stayed behind in that cabin, breathing for him. And when the wind rose again, he smiled faintly and murmured to the sea, God help me, because that woman will be my ruin. A day later, the sky collapsed over the sea as if destiny itself had decided to test them both. The Tempest's grace groaned under the weight of the waves, every creak of timber a reminder that the ocean forgave neither mistakes nor hesitant hearts. An hour of battle had already passed and the captain and his men worked tirelessly. Everything was under control, but the slightest error could mean disaster. Trent stood at the helm, muscles taut, eyes locked ahead. He shouted commands with a voice that cut through the roar of the wind. Rope, sail, bow, everything answered to him. Everything except her. Because Eve appeared out of nowhere, her hair loose and soaked, whipping across her face, her eyes blazing in the darkness, defying his orders once again. I told you to stay in the cabin, he roared, trying to see her through the slicing rain. And I told you I can't fear what's already saved me, she shouted back, grabbing a rope to help Thomas. A colossal wave slammed against the ship, spraying cold salt over everyone. Trent handed the wheel to his first mate and advanced, catching her around the waist before the sea could steal her away. Damn it, Eve, he gasped, pulling her against his chest. Are you trying to die? I've been closer to that than I'd like, Captain. For an instant, the world seemed suspended. Thunder roared, the wind eased, and there, in the midst of chaos, his gaze found hers. There was anger, fear, and something else. Something burning hotter than salt and fire combined. He cupped her face, his calloused fingers brushing her cold skin. The sea took everything from me once, he said, voice hoarse. And now it gives back what I never knew I needed, only laced with a dangerous dose of defiance. Eve caught her breath. And what exactly is that? She challenged, though her heart pounded wildly. His gaze dropped to her mouth. You, he answered simply, before kissing her. His lips crashed onto hers, the kiss coming like the sea itself, devastating, urgent, untamed. Heat amid the cold, surrender neither tried to resist. His hands wrapped around her as if reclaiming lost territory, and she, in turn, pulled him closer, as if she'd finally found the safe harbor that never existed on land. When they broke apart, both were breathless, foreheads pressed together, laughter trembling between gasps. So, this is how the captain apologizes? She murmured, eyes half closed. No, he said, voice low and dangerous. This is how the captain claims what's rightfully his. Eve arched a brow, defiant. You really think I belong to you? He smiled, that slow, knowing smile of a man aware of the effect he had. I think I'll have to prove it. And how do you plan to do that? By showing that insolent little mouth, he murmured, brushing her lips again. How to stay quiet under my command. The second kiss was deeper, slower, and Eve forgot the cold, the storm, even her own name. When the next wave struck, he lifted her easily into his arms, laughing under his breath. Enough defying the sea, Lady Ghost. Now it's my turn. She hit his shoulder lightly, still laughing. Put me down, you barbarian. Too late, he said, his arm tightening around her waist. The ground is wherever I decide it is. And under the stunned eyes of the crew, Captain Trent Warrick carried her over his shoulder, striding toward the cabin. Miguel, the Spaniard, was the first to react, whistling loudly. Madre de Dios, the Capitan has finally been conquered by the tide. Baptiste lifted a seashell as if to toast. Vive l'amour, and may no one ask me to make dinner tonight. First Mate Elias simply crossed his arms, smirking. Finally, I was tired of watching the captain argue with the wind as if the wind wore perfume. And young Thomas blinked, confused. Is the captain going to punish her again? Miguel crouched beside the boy, wearing that mischievous teacher grin. Ah, mi pequeño, when you're a man, you'll understand. Sometimes punishment is the reward. Laughter erupted across the deck as the cabin door shut behind them. Inside, the sound of the storm faded to a distant murmur, as if the ocean, weary of testing them, had finally gone silent to listen to what would come next. Trent leaned against the door, still breathless, and gently set her down. Eve tried to compose herself, but his gaze, hot, steady, untamable, stole the air from her lungs. Are you going to keep looking at me like that? She asked, trying for lightness, though her pulse raced. He took a step closer. Like what? Like you're about to lock me up. Maybe I am. Eve backed up until the cold wood pressed against her spine. Captain Warrick, she began, but her voice faltered. He braced one hand beside her head, the scent of salt and heat enveloping her. I detest formalities, he murmured, especially from the woman who's stolen my sleep since the day she came aboard. She swallowed hard. I didn't ask to steal anything from you, but you did, he said, his voice rough and deep. You stole my rest, my logic, and any chance of pretending I don't care. His gaze traveled down, then back to hers. Do you know what else you've taken from me, Eve? What? She whispered, hardly recognizing her own voice. My right to choose, he said, pressing his forehead to hers. Because now there's no choice. I want you, my sweet sin. At sea, on land, in hell if I must. I want you with me. She tried to keep her tone teasing, as always. You want to possess me, is that it? He smiled. That slow, dangerous smile again. No, I want to belong to you. The words surprised him as much as her, but there was no turning back. Trent cradled her face in both hands and kissed her. Not hastily, but reverently. A kiss of promise, of surrender, of everything neither had dared to say until now. Eve tried to resist, out of pride, out of habit, but melted in his hands. The defenses, the fears, the teasing, all dissolved under the steady, patient touch of a man who knew exactly when to command and when to simply hold. When the kiss ended, she stayed in his arms, eyes closed, her breathing rising and falling in rhythm with his. She began, but he silenced her with a gentle touch of his lips. Quiet now, Lady Ghost, he whispered, his voice rough and tender. I told, you I'd show you how to silence that defiant mouth. She smiled faintly, almost surrendering. And you did, you devil. He laughed low, the sound vibrating between them. Finally, the woman who defied storms and a stubborn captain has lost the battle. Maybe just this one, she teased, eyes gleaming. Good, he said, caressing her cheek, because I plan to spend the rest of my life challenging you and all the others. Eve looked at him, her smile softening into tenderness. Is that a promise, Captain? It's a sentence, he said, his thumb brushing her lips, drunk on her sweet scent. For all my life at sea and on land, you are my anchor and my perfumed downfall. She leaned closer, her lips a breath from his. Then drown me in the sea of your heart, Trent Warrick, she whispered. But come with me. He drew her into his arms again, and when he lifted her once more, there was no hesitation, only the sound of the wind against the sails, and the yow, heartbeat of two souls cast into the storm, only to find each other within it. Outside, the tempest's grace cut through the waves under a new captain, love, and inside that cabin, the entire sea seemed to fit within a single embrace. Months had passed since the night the sea tested them, and lost. Now, the tempest's grace cut through the waves beneath a generous sun, as if the ocean itself had finally learned to respect the love that had defied its laws. Eve walked the deck with steady steps, her light dress dancing with the wind. There was no fear left in her eyes, only light. She was a woman who had weathered storms of both water and soul, and had come out of them with her heart anchored to one name alone, Trent Warrick. Proving her father's innocence hadn't been easy. For weeks they had sailed between ports and courts, delivering the letters and documents Eve had guarded at the cost of her own life. The web of corruption surrounding the Ashworth name began to unravel, thread by thread, revealing the true culprit, Cedric, the half-brother who had tried to silence her. There had been resistance, blackmail, veiled threats, but the captain was not a man who retreated. Trent used what he possessed most fiercely, his honor, and the respect of powerful commanders who had fought beside him in the war. At last, the truth surfaced. The name of Lord Henry Ashworth was cleared, his title restored, and the inheritance that was rightfully his was returned to the bastard daughter the world once dared to deny. When the decree was read, Eve wept quietly. Trent only wrapped an arm around her shoulders and murmured in that disarming tone that still made her heart tremble. "I told you, Lady Fantastic. I told you, Lady Ghost. No one would ever touch you or what's yours again." Now there was no more fugitive, no more soldier haunted by guilt. There was husband and wife, captain and first mate, sailing beneath the same destiny. That afternoon she was on deck tending to the ship's logs, a task he had gladly given her, though he would never admit aloud that her handwriting was far more elegant than his. Trent came up behind her, his body brushing lightly against hers. "Stealing my duties, quartermaster?" he teased, voice low. She smiled without turning. "Someone has to keep your notes legible. Insolent, realistic, and far too beautiful for the sea," he murmured, leaning close to her ear. Eve closed the log slowly and turned, a smile dancing on her lips. "Careful, Captain. Words like that might make me believe you're still trying to impress me." "Still?" Trent arched a brow. "Woman, you make me work harder than any storm I've ever faced." Before she could reply, Miguel Alvarado appeared, his ever-present cup of rum in hand. "Caballeros!" he shouted. "A toast to the marriage everyone saw coming, to the lady of the ship, and the poor man now commanded by her." Eve laughed, the sound bright and contagious. From across the deck, Baptiste raised a ladle of soup. "Long live the captainess. May she order the captain to scrub the deck once in a while." Trent crossed his arms, pretending annoyance. "Miguel, si, Capitan. Crow's nest. Now, and I want the lower deck shining by dawn. But Capitan, one more word and you'll stand watch in the next port. No brothel, no rum, and none of your exuberant ladies." Miguel paled but didn't lose his charm. Straightening his hat, he declared for all to hear, "I say and repeat, sailors, there has never been a Capitan more virile or more commanding on the seven seas than Capitan Warrick." Laughter erupted across the ship. Eve stepped closer to her husband, amusement still glimmering in her eyes. "Looks like you've gained another admirer, my love." Trent glanced sideways, feigning seriousness. "Only one?" She lifted her face to his, whispering, "I'm inclined to agree with him." He pulled her by the waist, his gaze softening, warming. "Careful what you say, Lady Fant. Careful what you say, Lady Ghost. I might take it as provocation." "Maybe it is," she replied, just before his lips met hers. The kiss was slow, deep, and drew a chorus of whistles from the crew. Eve laughed against his mouth, her forehead resting on his. "The whole ship's watching, Trent. Let them watch," he said, voice rough. "Let them see what happiness looks like." The sun dipped low, gilding the sea. Tommy, now older and prouder, walked up to the couple holding a small medal in his hands, the same one that had once symbolized pain and loss. "I thought you'd want to keep this in the ship's log, ma'am," he said with a shy smile. Eve took it tenderly. "Thank you, Tommy. This medal belongs to our story, and to the sea that never gave up on us." Trent wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "Nor did I," he murmured. The Tempest's grace sailed into the distance beneath a sky of fire and gold. The wind filled its sails, and the final narration blurred into the sea's own whisper. Some loves are born on solid ground. Others need the wind to find each other. And there they were, the captain and his lady Phantasma, sailing beneath the sails of destiny, between laughter, love, and eternity. Did you enjoy seeing the captain finally lose his course for love? Then show you're aboard with us. Leave a like, subscribe to the Velvet Hearts Romances channel, and tell us in the comments, at what moment did you surrender to this couple? We want to see that deck overflowing with hearts in the comments.